There is a man in the Solemnace Galleries who can't refuse an order. His name is Koloma. He is Trazyn the Infinite's human librarian, ancient, his body laboring under the weight of an incredibly advanced age, serving in the archives of the most comprehensive private collection in the known galaxy. The mechanism of his service is Mindshackle Scarabs, tiny Necron constructs that bury into a victim's mind at the bearer's command, overriding the will and enforcing absolute obedience. He can't disobey Trazyn. He can't leave. He can't choose. What he does in those galleries, he does because a piece of Necron technology lodged in his skull tells him to. That isn't a minor detail to address eventually. That is the fact this story opens with, because everything that follows depends on you holding it. He is enslaved. And when Robert Rath's 2020 Black Library novel, The Infinite and the Divine, reaches the moments between Trazyn and Koloma, his advanced age taking its toll on him, what passes between them isn't horror deployed for grim effect, and it isn't irony. It's a genuinely touching moment between a 60-million-year-old machine and the man he owns. Readers felt it land. They recognized it and reported it back as one of the novel's most emotionally significant passages. Both of those facts are true simultaneously, and neither one cancels the other out. The meme version of Trazyn, robot hoarder, ancient kleptomaniac, galaxy-brained troll who crashes important battles to steal furniture, isn't exactly wrong. He does crash important battles to steal things, but it's a thumbnail sketch drawn over something considerably stranger and more unsettling. The actual argument, built from the canonical evidence, is this. Biotransference was designed by Satan's star gods to consume Necrontyr souls and leave hollow metal constructs in their place. It worked on almost everyone. In Trazyn's case, something survived that the process was specifically engineered to destroy. And that something, 60 million years later, is directed at a human being he literally owns, which constitutes more demonstrated compassion than the Imperium of Man extends to its free citizens across 10,000 years of recorded history. That isn't a punchline. That is a moral argument. It starts 60 million years ago, on a world orbiting a hostile star. The Necrontyr were a species in slow extinction, and they knew it. Their sun was the problem. Radiation shortened Necrontyr lifespans to fractions of what other species enjoyed. Brief, disease-haunted existences ending before anything substantial could be built on them. Their civilization had interstellar reach, architecture spanning worlds, ambitions that ranged across the galaxy. What they didn't have was time. Their bodies failed them generation after generation, and no scientific advancement could outpace what their own star was doing to their biology. They called it the curse of flesh, two words that carried the full weight of a species watching itself die by inches, across uncountable generations, unable to stop it. The Satan were older than the Necrontyr's civilization by an incomprehensible margin. Entities of stellar plasma, predatory intelligences that had been feeding on the galaxy since its first stars ignited. They saw the Necrontyr's suffering and offered a solution. Biotransference. Complete replacement of organic flesh with living metal. No more radiation sickness, no more shortened lifespans, immortality, and an end to everything the curse of flesh had been doing to them. Sarek, the Silent King, last pharaoh of the unified Necrontyr, authorized the pact on behalf of his people. He believed it was salvation. He held supreme authority over his people, and the responsibility for what came next is canonically his. He carries it still. During the transfer, the Catan consumed Necrontyr souls. That is what the process actually was. The immortality was real, the living metal bodies were real, and the price was every inner life the Necrontyr possessed, fed to the Catan as payment. The result was soulless beings who have difficulty taking pleasure in anything. Physical sensation was gone. Reproductive capacity was gone. The inner life, grief, joy, attachment, the specific weight of experiencing a moment and knowing it means something, all of it consumed. What emerged from the process were metal bodies that would never age, and minds that could no longer fully feel what they survived to witness. Sarek's regret isn't inferred, it's established lore. He has had 60 million years to understand what he authorized, and the guilt is written into his canonical return in the current era. The Necrons he transformed into immortals had their immortality paid for with something the Satan never told him was on the table. The process wasn't equal across the Necrontyr's caste system. Common warriors underwent the most complete erasure, near automatons now, executing directives without friction, pre-transfer personalities entirely consumed. Necrontyr nobles retained more. Overlords retained the most, sitting at the top of a hierarchy of surviving selfhood, capable of something that functions like genuine cognition and something that functions like genuine attachment, though the lore never fully resolves whether what persists is what actually survived or merely a functional imitation shaped by 60 million years of mechanical habit. Trazyn is an overlord of the Nihilak dynasty, pharaoh of the tomb world of Solemnace. Before the transfer, he is described in some accounts as a scribe, a recorder of his people's history, someone whose identity was built around the principle that what isn't preserved is lost forever. After 60 million years of mechanical existence, that pre-transfer identity survived in the only form the transfer permitted: obsession, operating at civilizational scale. The Solemnace Galleries, an entire tomb world converted into the most comprehensive collection of historically significant artifacts, specimens, and preserved events in the galaxy. Games Workshop describes the scope directly. Technologies and relics so valuable as to be priceless, preserved by a being who considers himself the galaxy's foremost historian. He calls himself the Archaeovist. He means it without irony. The drive survived. The question the lore has been building toward for 60 million years is whether anything else did. Robert Rath answered that in October 2020. The Infinite and the Divine centers on the rivalry between Trazyn and Orokin the Diviner, a Necron chronomancer whose relationship with Trazyn spans millions of years and has escalated past any point where either of them remembers what started it. Its plot involves an artifact from the War in Heaven with potential significance for Necron liberation. According to community accounts of the novel's climax, its ending involves Trazyn and Orokin confronting a Catan shard of the Deceiver that had been manipulating events from behind the scenes, an entity playing a longer game than either of them understood until the moment they were forced to play it together. The rivalry that defines both of them gets weaponized against them by something older and less interested in personal grievances. What the novel established beyond its plot is that Trazyn's depth isn't fan projection. Readers who came in skeptical of whether a Warhammer novel about Necrons could produce genuine characterization came out describing it as an entry point to the entire hobby. Rath wrote him as witty in a way that actually has weight behind it, quippy, but without the hollow quality of humor that exists purely as a character trait. Earned wit, rooted in a specific personality that has been operating for 60 million years and accumulated a very particular set of opinions about everything. The novel locked something into the official record that the fandom had suspected was there, but couldn't cite. Koloma is in that record. He is Trazyn's librarian, not a generic household servant, but someone whose knowledge and judgment he employs in a specific archival function. His role implies Trazyn values what he brings beyond the compelled obedience the Mindshackles guarantee. He could have acquired anyone for his galleries. He acquired a librarian and kept him in a role that required his expertise to function, not just his presence. His incredibly advanced age is taking its toll on him. The farewell between them carries enough emotional weight that readers felt it as a genuine loss, not a punchline about a robot failing to understand mortality. Trazyn understood. That is exactly the problem. That is the thing the Catan were supposed to prevent. The Mindshackle Scarabs mean none of his service is voluntary. He can't choose to leave, can't refuse an instruction, can't exercise the will that any librarian in any other setting would use to decide what gets preserved and what gets discarded. All of it overridden by a Necron device in his mind. Both true, simultaneously, without resolution. Trazyn owns him completely. Trazyn mourns him. A being whose soul was consumed 60 million years ago, who by the mechanical logic of his own transformation should register Koloma's decline as a maintenance problem, registers it as a loss. The Satan built a process specifically to prevent this. In Trazyn's case, the process failed. M41, Cadia, the 13th Black Crusade. Abaddon the Despoiler had been building toward this moment across 10 millennia of Black Crusades. The fortress world fell. The pylons holding the Eye of Terror at bay were destroyed. The planet cracked apart. The Imperial defense collapsed in real time, and Trazyn showed up. The specific details of the Cadian pylons, the Eye of Terror containment mechanism, and the planet's physical destruction are general setting claims not verified against provided source materials. Each requires confirmation against a primary lore source, Gathering Storm, Fall of Cadia, or equivalent, before final delivery. Preserved soldiers from his collection were released against the Black Legion, Imperial military assets kept in the Solemnace Galleries and deployed into an active war zone at the exact moment they were most historically significant. Among the forces Trazyn reportedly freed, according to the Gathering Storm supplement materials, was Inquisitor Erasmus Greyfax, held in his collection before Cadia and deployed into the battle against Abaddon's forces. The details require that specific source rather than casual summary, and the core claims await primary text confirmation. What the account describes, if accurate, is this. She was held in his collection by whatever means Trazyn uses to preserve his specimens. She was freed to fight chaos, and she subsequently appears, if those accounts also hold, in the Dark Imperium era, serving forces loyal to Robute Guilliman, the returned Primarch, working to reconstruct the Imperium's capacity to survive. If the Gathering Storm accounts are accurate, an Imperial Inquisitor, preserved by 60 million years of obsessive hoarding, goes on to serve humanity's future. Trazyn's selfishness produced that, not intentionally, not because he was trying to help, because his interests and the Imperium's survival happened to point the same direction in that specific moment, and he followed his interests. According to the Gathering Storm accounts, his stated motivations for showing up to Cadia at all were two things held simultaneously without contradiction: prevent chaos from spreading across the galaxy, and acquire historically significant items from the event in progress. If those accounts hold, no conflict registered between those two motivations. He was there to collect the fall of Cadia as a historical moment, and also there because a chaos victory would make future collecting significantly less interesting. Both goals, pursued in parallel, producing outcomes that mattered. Whether he departed with Lord Castellan Ursakar E. Creed preserved for his collection, the wounded defender of Cadia, the man who held the line longer than anyone should have been able to, carried out as an artifact of the battle's final hours, is a claim the available accounts haven't fully resolved at primary source level. The shape of the story makes it feel inevitable. The documentation makes it complicated. What isn't complicated is the pattern. Trazyn arrived at a catastrophe, spent the battle fighting on the side of the people trying to stop it, and left with a more complete archive of the event than anyone else. The heroism and the acquisition as the same act. This is the thesis compressed into a single afternoon on a dying planet. Selfishness and heroism running parallel, with the man generating both of them experiencing no friction between them whatsoever. The dismissal that Trazyn is an overpowered power fantasy, fan service for players who want their faction to dominate everything, collapses under his actual record. He is banned from numerous Necron tomb worlds. Other Necrons, his own species, don't want him near their holdings because he steals from them. Not from enemies, from other Necrons. The kleptomania required to get formally excluded from multiple different dynasties across millions of years represents a kind of anti-achievement. A 60-million-year-old overlord who has made himself unwelcome among the people who underwent the same process he did, who have the same near-limitless patience, and who still decided the risk of having him nearby wasn't worth the alternative. In The Infinite and the Divine, Orican, the person who has competed with Trazyn for longer than human civilization has existed, traps him in a time loop. The subjective duration reported in discussions of the novel is extensive. The primary text is the authority on the precise figure. What matters is the fact. His oldest rival found a mechanism to imprison him in looping time and execute it successfully. Trazyn isn't invulnerable to the people who know him best. His oldest enemy solved him, at least temporarily, and the solution was to turn time itself into a cage. There is also the matter of the Catan Shard of the Deceiver. The entity that had been manipulating events in the novel's background was operating through both Trazyn and Orican for an extended period. A fragment of a god Trazyn presumably assumed had already been dealt with, running him as an instrument. The specific pride that makes Trazyn effective, the absolute conviction that he is the galaxy's most sophisticated observer, that nothing of significance escapes his notice, became exactly the vulnerability the deceiver exploited. He wasn't deceived despite his intelligence. He was deceived because of it. His certainty that he understood the game meant he stopped checking whether the game had changed. And then there is the incident, circulated in community lore discussions, in which an assassination attempt on Orican went wrong enough to accidentally seed the conditions for a gene-stealer cult that persisted for generations. The primary source for this claim hasn't been identified in the available materials. It's a claim circulating in community discussions whose origin hasn't been traced to a specific codex or novel passage, rather than confirmed hardcover text. If it's approximately accurate, it's also the most inherently absurd outcome in the setting: centuries of alien infestation as collateral damage from a failed personal grudge. Nobody scripted that to be funny. It's funny because it actually happened to a 60-million-year-old godlike being who was trying to kill his annoying colleague. These are the failures of a real character. They match the personality they're attached to. An arrogant, obsessive, genuinely brilliant being who is periodically catastrophically blind to what is directly in front of him. His weaknesses are the shadow side of his strengths, which is how real people fail and not how power fantasies do. The Solemnace Galleries contain things the galaxy doesn't yet know it needs. What can be stated confidently? Preserved Imperial military forces, confirmed by the Cadia event itself. An Inquisitor who, if the Gathering Storm accounts hold, went on to serve the Avenging Sun. Artifacts from a war 60 million years old that nobody else survived to remember. Community discussions describe a Fulgrim clone, a preserved specimen of one of the Emperor's own gene sons, claimed to be held in nutrient solution in the galleries, with community-level reports, unverified against primary text, that attempts to recover it have ended in failure. The source record on these claims needs primary text verification before they can be stated with authority. What the claim illustrates, confirmed or not, is the structural argument the collection makes over time. Trazyn isn't curating for the galaxy's benefit. He curates because 60 million years of accumulated appetite has merged with a pre-transfer identity that was always about preservation. The galactic significance of what he holds is incidental to why he holds it. Incidental and potentially decisive. The difference between the Solemnace Galleries and any other archive of dangerous artifacts is that Trazyn intends to keep them. He doesn't study them toward a purpose. He doesn't plan a strategic deployment. He keeps them because they are historically significant and because he finds them interesting. Whatever benefit the galaxy eventually derives from that collection will arrive as a byproduct of 60 million years of obsessive kleptomania. A good outcome produced for the wrong reasons is still a good outcome. In this setting, that formula describes almost every victory anyone has ever had. Hive worlds pack billions of people into industrial complexes where life expectancy is a function of what labor they can produce before they stop producing it. The Imperial Guard conscripts from underfed populations and sends them to hold objectives that will be abandoned in the next campaign season. Penal legions exist as an active military category. human beings reduced to cannon fodder as institutional policy. The Inquisition holds canonical authority to purge entire civilian populations on suspicion of contamination, and exercises that authority with enough frequency that it doesn't register as exceptional. Servitors fill the Imperium's ships, its cathedrals, its administrative infrastructure. People, lobotomized and mechanically augmented for specific labor functions, their prior identities dissolved into the work they perform. The Imperium calls this maintenance. It calls this order. Production note. The claims in this paragraph constitute general Warhammer 40K setting knowledge not verified against provided source materials. Each requires confirmation against a primary lore source, relevant codex entries, or Black Library texts before final delivery. The servitor claim in particular requires a specific codex citation. The Imperium owns its people by various mechanisms and notices none of them specifically when they die. Trazyn owns Koloma by a device in his skull. He also mourns him. A community of readers recognized that moment and named it something genuine. This isn't a defense of Mindshackle Scarabs. The mechanism is what it is, and naming it in the first 30 seconds of this argument means it doesn't need to be defended. The point is narrower and considerably more uncomfortable. The setting's moral baseline is catastrophically low enough that a being who enslaves a human librarian and then genuinely grieves his decline registers higher on the scale of demonstrated compassion than the institutions claiming to be humanity's guardians. The Imperium owns millions of Kolomas and never learns their names. Trazyn knows Koloma's name, employs his specific expertise, and experiences something in the vicinity of grief when he fails. That comparison isn't meant to comfort anyone. It's meant to show what the setting actually looks like when you hold its institutions to the standard it asks you to apply to its villains. Sarek has returned to the galaxy carrying the weight of what he authorized 60 million years ago. Some lore discussions describe a desire, among Sarek and others, to reverse biotransference, to restore what the Catan consumed. Whether that is explicitly stated in a primary text or inferred from the depth of his canonical guilt is a question the sources leave partially open. The intent is plausible. The guilt is documented. The direction that guilt points is legible. Take the possibility seriously, because the question it opens is the most philosophically loaded thing in Trazyn's entire canon. If biotransference were reversed, what would actually be restored? The process was designed to consume his soul. It consumed most of it. What remained has been operating in living metal for 60 million years, shaped by a rivalry with Orican that predates human civilization, by the specific grief of watching Koloma age past what his body can sustain, by the accumulated texture of millions of years of acquiring and losing and keeping and cataloging things that matter. The soul the Satan failed to fully consume has been running without a biological substrate since before humanity's first ancestors stood upright. It isn't the soul the Necrontyr scribe had. It's the soul that survived the attempt to destroy the Necrontyr scribe, shaped by everything the scribe never lived to experience. Restoring the pre-transfer Necrontyr wouldn't return Trazyn to himself. It would erase 60 million years of the specific configuration of personhood that survived against the explicit design of the transfer process. The Satan wanted a hollow instrument. Instead, they produced an archivist who mourns humans, who showed up to Cadia because the moment was historically significant, who has been building, accident by accident, acquisition by acquisition, what may be the most consequential preservation project in the galaxy's history, constructed entirely by selfishness, by obsession, by the failure of gods to fully finish what they started. The collection fills the Solemnace Galleries. Among their most prized sections, in some accounts, the prismatic galleries. Preserved armies, an inquisitor who, if the accounts hold, went on to serve the avenging sun. Artifacts from a war 60 million years old that nobody else survived to remember. And woven through all of it, the residue of a process that was supposed to leave nothing behind except obedience. The Satan failed. 60 million years later, the failure is still curating, still caring. In whatever configuration 60 million years of mechanical existence has left for caring to live in. Whether that makes Trazyn the galaxy's best boss, its most consequential accident, or simply what remains when you try to erase a person and don't quite finish the job, that is the question the Solemnace Galleries leave open. Subscribe for more stories like this.